مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. داعش الدولة الإسلامية ما هي؟ جماعة إرهابية؟ دولة مستقلة؟ متى تتحول من واحدة إلى الأخرى؟ هل تنتصر؟ هل تنهزم؟ ما معايير الحكم على هذه الأسلحة الملهى؟ حاربت أمريكا الأطراف الفاعلة من غير الدول، ويشمل ذلك الجماعات الإرهابية منذ تأسيس الدولة تقريبا، ولكنها لم تواجه أبدا خصما مثل داعش قبل عامين فقط. قلل الرئيس أوباما من شأن داعش معتبرا أيها مصدر إزعاج بسيط، قائلا أنهم ناشئو الجماعات الإرهابية. واليوم نظمت واشنطن تحالفا يضم 60 دولة لهزيمتها وتدميرها، ولم ننجح بعد. هذا يزيد عن كونه مصدر إزعاج بسيط. لمناقشة التحديات الفريدة لسياسة محاربة داعش وهزيمتها، يسرني أن أرحب بخبيري الإرهاب المرموقين روبرت وراين غرير. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. I'm sitting here with Roel Mark-Garect and with Ryan Greer to talk about the battle against terrorism, the fight against ISIS. And we're going to begin, gentlemen, with what I think for many viewers is a very basic question. In the battle against ISIS, who's winning, us or them? Well,
I would say they're still winning. I mean, I think there have been setbacks, but I don't think you're going to see ISIS collapse anytime soon. And as long as it is still extant, as long as it holds territory, yeah, I think it has the capacity to resuscitate. If they lose Mosul, the Americans are obviously going to have to contribute a lot more to that cause. Then we might want to revise that statement.
Ryan, what do you think?
Look, it depends on how you define winning. We've taken out a lot of their leadership, a lot of their fighting force, their financing, taking back about 40% of the territory that they once held. Having said that, for them, winning is some sociopath anywhere in the world blowing themselves up in their name. So it's hard to lose if your goal for winning is so easy to attain. They now that we've sort of started to squeeze them within Iraq and Syria, they've now created a base in Libya. Should we start to squeeze them there, they could go somewhere else. With foreign fighters from over 120 countries in the world flooding there over the last several years, it's hard to imagine that they couldn't create a base somewhere else. So I think they are winning, but it's kind of an unfair match in the sense of how do you defeat an idea. It's going to take a generation.
Well, you raise, I think, a very important question of how do you measure winning. I mean, it's on the one hand, it's very tough to win if only one guy somewhere is operating in their name. Mm-hmm. But there's winning. Everyone will know if there's no territorial base for them to operate. Are we anywhere close to achieving the objective of denying them any significant territorial base?
Well, as I said, they've lost 40% of the territory they once held, and the coalition is gearing up for the Battle of Mosul. If the coalition can take back, if the Iraqi security forces can take back Mosul, then I think it's safe to say that ISIL is close to defeat in that region. But like I said, it's almost impossible to tell because there's no telling where the next safe haven can be, and already we're hearing the alarms within Washington being sound about Libya.
Right, so, well, historical question. We defeated Germany and Japan in 3.5 years, two huge powers, the greatest military powers of the day. Why is it so tough to defeat 20, 30, 50,000 guys in the middle of the desert?
Well, I think the primary reason is we don't want to commit. So if the United States is unwilling to commit soldiers to this enterprise, it defaults to others to carry that load. And obviously the Iraqi army is in very bad shape. You're having to use Iraqi militias, some of them trained by the Revolutionary Guard Corps in Iran. You're having to fall to the Kurds, who have severe manpower issues and really don't want to occupy large stretches of Arab territory. So it's primarily a question of American will, I think, and American will on this issue has been lacking because we are gun shy of going back into the region with any numbers of U.S. soldiers.
So is your argument that a different American approach over the last 2, 3, 4 years and this issue would have been resolved?
Well, I think it's certainly a good hypothetical to imagine the United States going into Syria in a meaningful way in 2011 or 2012 to support the Syrian opposition before the Sunni opposition metastasized and created this radical jihadist movement that now has many heads. That would have been an interesting exercise, and I think in the long run would have cost the United States a lot less, certainly the Europeans a lot less than what we've seen.
I mean, I know that this is a counterfactual, but do you agree with that?
Mostly. I mean, you know, it seems like what we do in the short term interferes with what our long-term interests are. I think if we sent a lot of troops back to Iraq and essentially the U.S. became the Iraqi fighting force, we'd have a lot of gains in the near term, but we'd be setting up Iraqis for failure in the long term. And then kind of where does it end, right? I mean, we could then go into Syria, then Libya, but there's ISIL support in Southeast Asia, in Bangladesh. I mean, where is next? Where's the line going to be drawn? We're already spending $11.5 million per day on this current fight, so I can't imagine us being willing to spend too much more American blood or American funds on this effort. Just there isn't a ton of political support there for that. I would also say, though, that also we are increasing our effort on the ground. We recently, U.S. Special Forces recently did capture an ISIL member in Iraq. So we'll see if that is a trend to be increased in the near future. But like I said, it's not helping the Iraqi security forces for us to do their work for them. But at the same time, sometimes we need to. So I think if we went in with overwhelming force today, we would defeat them in the relatively near term. But we would also create a new global call for anyone with anti-American sentiment to come fight us there, and we'd be in a prolonged quagmire for generations to come.
So you're really raising two questions. I know Ruel wants to get in on this, but you're raising two questions. One, sure, let's say we beat ISIL right here. Is this now just a fact of life for the foreseeable future? Sunni jihadist threat. And then secondly, the archipelago strategy, you know, whack-a-mole in Syria, whack-a-mole in Libya, here comes Philippines, here comes Mali. Where does it end? Ruel?
Well, one, I would say there was really no excuse from withdrawing from Iraq. The war was won, the battle was won, and you needlessly gave the Islamic State the opportunity to expand and take advantage of the Sunni Shiite tension in that country. So Iraq, I think, would have been an easy win for us if we just maintained the status quo. President Obama chose not to do that. Syria is more complicated, obviously. I would argue that given what's happened in Syria, given the loss of life, the damage to the European Union, the enhancement of Vladimir Putin, Iranian expansionism, I would say that American involvement there in 2011, 2012 would have been the cheap and the astute decision. Whether you go, how you go after the Islamic State elsewhere, that's complicated. I'm not a great believer in drone warfare. I think it can have some value, but I think when you rely on drone warfare, what you're essentially saying is I'm unprepared to use more force than that. I think you have to be judicious, but there may be times where you will want to use American armed forces elsewhere, depending upon whether jihadist outfits start to gain a lot of territory.
So, but let me just come back to these two big picture questions. Is this a fact of life for American national security as far as the eye can see?
Globally, absolutely. Let me just push back slightly on my colleague. I mean, I think America going in the first place created the political demand for ISIL. The American and Iraqi forces making progress in Iraq allowed ISIL to regroup over the border in Syria. And that created kind of a long-term political demand. And as long as we, the United States, are taking this active role in those lands, we're going to create a political demand for violence. We can quell that violence through armed forces and development efforts and governance efforts. But as long as we continue sort of having troops on the ground there, we're gonna anger the locals who also want to kick us out. Globally speaking, this will be a law enforcement effort for forever. I think the U.S. approach is comprehensive. This is a battle of ideas. This is a battle of financing. This is a battle of military support to allies, and it's a battle for our military. Whether or not our military does a lot of the work, I think the next administration will decide. But it is definitely a case for the FBI and special forces globally for a long time. It's also going to be for our diplomatic and development corps globally for a long time. Absolutely.
So, Ruel, do you agree with this argument that, if I don't want to read too much into it, but that essentially our activity, our military activity, was the trigger for a lot of the rise of ISIL?
Not at all. I think the historical argument for global jihad against the United States is a pretty weak one, actually, insofar as American, say, invasion of Iraq, the Anglo-American invasion of Iraq, triggered this jihad. Actually, I think if you compare what's happened in Iraq against the Americans and, say, Syria against the Iranians and Bashar al-Assad, I'd say that the toxin call of jihad has been much more effective than it was against the Americans. I think against the Americans it was a bit of a fizzle, actually. I mean, you are always going to have individuals who are going to hate the United States for a variety of reasons, including in those reasons because the United States is involved in the Middle East. I would just suggest, though, that on the other side, I think the pluses outweigh the minuses. Again, that's not a call for the United States to intervene all over the place, but I think we do have a problem here in that the military dictatorships throughout the region and some of the monarchies have essentially impoverished and pulverized their own societies. They have created the breeding ground for Islamic militancy, and this is a problem the United States cannot solve, but it's certainly, I think, a situation where the United States can try to manage when it metastasizes into jihadist groups that actually own territory, because we know when that happens, they are going to use them as safe havens, and they are going to eventually strike out at us.
Okay, well, this is a scary conversation. We'll come back with more because we have to talk about state-sponsored terrorism, a topic which we haven't even begun to address, in just a moment. Again, our panel of foreign policy specialists includes Ryan Greer. Ryan is the CEO of VASA Strategies, a social impact strategic advisory firm with a focus on countering violent extremism. He is also a fellow with the Truman National Security Project. Ryan recently left the State Department, where he served as a policy advisor for counterterrorism. Previously, he had managed Afghanistan reconstruction programs. Ryan has also served as a special assistant at the White House National Security Council and on staff for 2 members of the U.S. House of Representatives. Sitting to his left is Ruel Margaret. Ruel is a senior fellow with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, where he focuses on Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, terrorism, and intelligence. A former Middle Eastern specialist at the Central Intelligence Agency, he is the author most recently of The Wave: Man, God, and the Ballot Box in the Middle East. He's a contributing editor for the Weekly Standard and has been a correspondent for the Atlantic Monthly, as well as a frequent contributor to the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and other publications. So, gentlemen, before we move on to state-sponsored terrorism, I did want to ask you about a fear that has emerged in America's political debate, and that concerns the flow of refugees and migrants from Syria, Iraq, and elsewhere, and a specific aspect of this, namely the extent to which there may be terrorists among them, whether sleeper cells, people hiding out, that sort of thing. How serious, how widespread is this phenomenon? Right?
let me address kind of two sub issues here, which is the refugee issue, and then how serious is it that people coming from other countries here might be sleeper cells. I think those are separate issues. So I would say, firstly, we have to worry about sleeper cells just like we have to worry about many homegrown terrorism or other kind of forms of terrorism. Absolutely. There are over 200 Americans who've gone to fight on behalf of ISIL who may someday return, or others who may migrate here through any mechanism of migration, who may have nefarious plans, and we have to be on guard with our top levels of analysis to track those people down. Separately is the refugee issue. Becoming a refugee means you're a migrant, and then you have special legal status. Now, your legal status has no bearing on your security risk or lack thereof, and those who get that legal status receive the same vetting as other people coming to this country, but they receive that vetting 4 times as well as additional vetting. So they are the most vetted people that come to this country. So is there some sort of concern that one of them could decide they hate America after they've gotten here? Absolutely, just like any other concern. But the fact that they are refugees is no kind of larger a threat. In fact, it's even smaller a threat when compared to other people coming to this country. And we do have a very strong law enforcement and border security apparatus. So, while we should always be on guard, I'm not as concerned as many other people sounding the alarm.
Is this threat been a bit inflated for politics, Ruel?
Yeah, I think it's been pretty grossly exaggerated. I think, in particular, the American right has largely lost its mind on this issue. I would really focus more on the radicalization of homegrown Muslims. I think there is a problem with militant Muslims who are resident in Europe coming to the United States. That has always been a concern since 9/11. I think the European security services, primarily the British and the French, who essentially lead Europe on counterterrorism, have done a reasonably decent job, even though obviously there have been problems. So I don't think the immigrant issue is a serious counterterrorist threat, at least if you compare it to the other problems that we've had. So I think for the Europeans it is more of a concern, just simply for the fact that they don't have, as of yet, any control over their borders. And obviously the European security services are worried about this, and I suspect in the not too distant future you will see some change there.
All right. We only have a few seconds left, but I did want to get your views on a very specific question. U.S. government set up to deal with the issues we've discussed. When you look at this, I know you've just recently left the government and you've been in parts of the government. Are we well organized, well prepared to address this set of questions?
I think we're very well organized to address the what we call find, fix, and finish, meaning we find an individual who's a terrorist, we secure where they are, and then we either arrest or kill them. I think the government's prepared to do that, as it has been since we invented our counterterrorism infrastructure. The threat, however, is evolving into a global battle of ideas. I think we're ill-equipped to deal with that, not only because interagency coordination in Washington has always been difficult, and now it's going to continue to be difficult, but because the funding is so outmatched. I mean, something like 1% of our terrorism-related funds go towards this kind of battle of ideas and convincing young people that America doesn't hate them and that there are more productive things to do than go fight in Syria. That needs a lot more funding and a lot more attention. President Obama has brought more attention to this. Congress has provided a little bit more funding, but it's far outmatched by other diplomatic and development efforts that we take on. So I think right now we are outmatched in the battle of ideas, but if it becomes a battle of who needs to be killed or arrested, I think America is going to continue to be number one fairly strongly.
We do well in kinetics, bad in ideology. Do you agree?
Oh, I'm not sure that the United States has to do particularly well in ideology, because the United States is just a huge ideological bulldozer. So, I mean, the arguments for and against the United States are more or less out there, and I'm not sure you need to fine-tune them all that much. That's not to say there isn't a job for the State Department and the CIA to do in that category, but I wouldn't get over-exercised about it. I And I think the United States probably actually wastes a lot of money on counterterrorism. I mean, Americans are just congenitally incapable of doing anything small and intelligent. They have to spend a lot of money, they have to hire a lot of people, they have to hire a lot of unqualified people. It's just the way Americans do things. So I think the United States, I think on the major issues since 9/11, I think the United States, the bureaucracies involved with these has handled it more or less competently. They're too big, they have too many people, they could fire a lot of people, and I think American counterterrorism would still be quite decent, maybe even better. But I mean, we throw money at problems. That's the American way. So are we in better shape than we were, 9/11? Sure, absolutely. Should we nevertheless be somewhat jaundiced about the idea that we need to spend more money, put more manpower, increase the CIA, increase the Pentagon, et cetera, for the battle on counterterrorism? I'd say probably not. I think we'd probably be much better served if we took that money and we spent it on building ships, tanks, airplanes, that type of thing.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Fascinating debate. I'm delighted that our viewers got to hear the fullness of this debate. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Ruel, for joining us today on Dakhel, Washington.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول الاستراتيجية الأمريكية لهزيمة داعش في سوريا والعراق وليبيا، أرجو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على عنوان البريد الإلكتروني التالي insidewashington@alhurra.com. معكم روبرت ساتلوف. شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.